Hello everyone, hope you're having an amazing Sunday, because if you're having an amazing Sunday, well, I'm having an amazing Sunday. If I'm having an amazing Sunday, well, you should also be having an amazing Sunday. Today I'm at the Emcot Mall Flea Market. Well, it's actually a very interesting place, and I'm here every Sunday. So, you know, if you want to do some in real life organizing with me, any comrades want to do some in real life organizing with me, come over here on Sunday. And this is where I do all my antique shopping. You know, it's a very interesting place. One of the best kept hidden open secrets, of Petaling Jaya, right? There are some expats who know about this place, but by and large, it's it's mostly an open secret. So do come over here on Sunday if you want to buy some interesting knickknacks. You know, they have vintage things, they have antiques, and they even have video games, yeah. Okay, I'm just going to ask you a favor, so please do subscribe to my channel. And if you haven't clicked subscribe, just do please click the subscribe button. Every little bit of help helps. So without further ado, let's begin. And I hope to see you here one of these Sundays. Okay, hope you're having a good Sunday. I, for one, am having an excellent Sunday. I'm actually in the middle of my antique shopping at Emcot Mall, but it's better to shoot outside because there are fewer people, and I'm just a bit concerned that, people might be not very happy if I breach their privacy by including them in this video. So I'll shoot here, okay? Now, without further ado, let's begin. I suppose you're quite familiar with this reaction that you get on social media when you call Zionism out for what it is, a racist, right-wing, reactionary ideology, and you call out the state of Israel as a racist, right-wing, reactionary ethno-state, right? Chances are you're going to get some very, very angry reactions, mostly from the Jewish community, but also from people in the Western world saying things like, these people have endured the worst kind of persecution and the worst kind of genocide, in which 4 to 6 million of them were systemically massacred. How dare you accuse those people of what happened to them, right? And, this knee-jerk reaction whenever any critique is made out of Zionism, or when any critique is made of the state of Israel, when we question the existence of the state of Israel, chances are you're going to get this knee-jerk angry reaction saying, how dare you accuse the Jewish people of the world of doing to others what was done to them, right? And the implied meaning in this situation seems to be that, someone who was once oppressed cannot be an oppressor, right? Now, ignoring the fact that Zionism is a 19th century European philosophy that came about even before the Nazis began the so-called final solution, the fact of the matter is that, no, it is certainly possible for a group that was once an oppressed group in order to become an oppressor group, right? And this applies on a microcosmic scale as well. Like, people who were once bullied in school can end up becoming office bullies in their adult life, right? And, the fact of the matter is that, daughters-in-law who were bullied by their mothers-in-law can in turn end up the very thing that oppressed them when their sons end up getting married, right? They can end up mistreating their own daughters-in-law in the same way they were treated by their mothers-in-law, right? And the fact of the matter is that we recognize that the transatlantic slave trade, in which thousands upon thousands of Africans who were mercilessly kidnapped from Africa and sent to work on the cotton and sugar plantations in the Bahamas, as well as the UK and America, we recognize that was a crime against humanity, right? And I don't think that there's anyone in their right mind who would call the Holocaust a good thing. There's no one in their right mind who wouldn't call the Holocaust a blot, a stain, a disgrace on humanity, right? But having said that, one thing people are not aware of is the fact that these slave masters in the South of America, were many of themselves oppressed people in a previous epoch, right? Because the fact of the matter is that until the modern concept of whiteness was invented in order to justify colonial exploitation and dehumanize the colonized, even Irish and Scottish people were counted as lesser Europeans, right? Yes, Irish and Scottish people were regarded as the lesser Europeans, and they too suffered from persecution and abuse from other types of Europeans who regarded themselves as higher Europeans, right? But when these same Irish and Scottish people migrated to the Americas, right, they themselves ended up owning slaves, abusing their slaves, and becoming the very thing that had oppressed them just a generation earlier, right? And as for the African American slaves in the transatlantic slave trade, right? It is true that they suffered, one of the most abominable things in the world, which was the brutal stripping of their culture, their language, their heritage, and their identity, and their forced assimilation into white society that did not even want them in the first place, right? And yet, I'm going to make a longer video on this, but these very same African American slaves, after the end of slavery, in turn were sent to Liberia under the auspices of the American Colonization Society. And in a tragic twist of events, these very same people, in a most tragically ironic state of affairs, ended up abusing and dehumanizing the local people of West Africa. Yes, the very founders of Liberia, the freed slaves of America, were soon to discover that they were different from the local African people of West Africa, and pretty soon they found out that they could not coexist harmoniously because of vastly different personalities, vast differences in culture. The fact of the matter is that these people worshipped a foreign god that had nothing to do with the gods of Africa. These people spoke the white man's tongue. They did not, and they could not even find out which tribe they belonged to, right? It was not their fault that their culture was mercilessly stripped from them. But the fact of the matter is that when they went back to the so-called motherland, right, and were expecting to be welcomed as long-lost brothers, very soon they discovered the sad, bitter truth that they were strangers in their own ancestral land, and they were not regarded as long-lost brothers and sisters by the local people of Africa, but rather as white colonizers in African skin, right? And pretty soon, this caused them to get very, very angry and resentful, and eventually tensions would arise between the African American settlers and the local tribal people of the region we now call Liberia, right? Which was, just like Israel, an artificially created country as a result of, Western colonization, right? Using colored people as their satellites in the region. And very soon, these people would end up fighting with each other, and eventually, in a sad twist of poetic irony, these former slaves, who had suffered one of the worst crimes in humanity, ended up behaving to the local people of the region the same way the slave master, who himself had been an oppressed serf or an oppressed Irishman or Scotsman in the previous generation, behaved to them, you see. So the cycle of trauma just continued, right? And I could also speak about the fact that the majority of the people who moved to Australia were convicts, right? They were, from a dialectical Marxist point of view, an oppressed underclass, right? In England. But when they established themselves in Australia, they themselves ended up oppressing and abusing the Aboriginal Australian people, right? In the same way their British overlords had oppressed and abused them, right? So you see, the cycle of trauma just continues, and it's not all their fault, because it is possible to become brutalized as a result of your surroundings, right? Like if you read Olaudah Equiano's memoirs, you'll find that, in his tribe in Africa, people were generally very polite, very civilized. People hardly swore, and people would consider bad language to be shocking, right? And yet you have this artificially constructed black culture, and I don't mean this to be offensive to anyone who's African American. You have this artificially constructed gangster thug culture that is basically a rehashing or a spiritual successor to the culture of the Southern American slave master, right? Basically, the gangster thug is basically the spiritual reinterpretation of the slave master, right? So it is possible indeed to end up getting conditioned by your surroundings and end up becoming the very thing that you hate, right? And I've no doubt that European people suffered, I've no doubt that Jewish people suffered from persecution in Europe particularly. Not so much in the Arab-Muslim world, but in Europe, right? But unfortunately, Zionism, if you watch my previous videos, also adopted the ugly characteristics of social Darwinism and the ugly characteristics of Western chauvinism and European supremacy, right? In fact, Theodor Herzl himself says it in his book, The Jewish State, that he wants to create a rampart of European civilization to guard against Asian barbarism, right? So the Zionist fundamentally considers himself Jewish, but at the same time, even though Jews are supposed to be an Eastern race, they consider themselves to be Western, right? And so that's why the fact of the matter is that Zionism is fundamentally Judaism, with colonizer traits in it. Just like, and I'm not saying that it's impossible for other races to have colonizer traits. Even the freed black slaves of Liberia ended up with colonizer traits, right? And they exploited and abused the local people of the region in the same way the slave master had oppressed and abused them in a previous generation, right? Even the top 10% of Liberians, richest Liberians, who circulate the wealth among themselves, are descended from these African American slaves, right? So, unfortunately, it is possible indeed for someone that was once oppressed in order to become an oppressor, right? And their past history does not absolve them of the fact that they are guilty now. Just because your ancestors were oppressed, it doesn't mean that you yourself are not guilty of oppressing others now, right? There cannot be a link, or we must not basically use the past as an excuse for oppressing others, right? Because every time we call out Israel's excesses or we call out Israel's barbarity towards the people of Palestine, we are bound to hear people bringing up the Holocaust and saying, how dare you even accuse Jews of anything of that nature, right? But to me, that's the same as if, let's say, an African American man goes up and beats up an Asian elder, and then we call out his criminal behavior, and he says, how dare you call me a criminal? That is racist because my ancestors were slaves, right? What does the fact that your ancestors were slaves have to do with the fact that you're bullying someone right now, right? So, yeah, we acknowledge that anti-Semitism is a bane on this planet, right? And I've always made it a point to tell people, no, Jewish people are not Zionists necessarily. I assume that every Jewish person I meet is not a Zionist, right? I go out of my way to try and convince people that Jewish people, just like you and me, are nice, reasonable, civilized people, and they're not racist, warmongering, imperialists. Because anti-Semitism is not dead, right? But it is kept on life support by Zionists that continue to conflate every single Jewish person in the world with them, right? So if you are serious about fighting anti-Semitism, you would not lump every Jewish person in the world with the state of Israel, and you would not lump every Jewish person in the world with the Zionists, considering their track record on human rights, right? So yeah, as much as I will continue to call out anti-Semitism, I will not be silenced from calling out the barbarity of the Zionist entity. And basically, you know, at some point there has to be, you cannot keep using past grievances as an excuse, right? In order to bully and oppress someone else, right? But I just want to end this video by saying that, you know, if you have any grievances, if you have any historical grievances, don't take it out on the Palestinians, right? They weren't the ones who organized the Holocaust. Historically, the Arab Muslims were much kinder to the Jewish people than the European Christians ever were, right? And yet the leaders of the West want you to forget this point, right? You know, historically, Jewish people always found safe havens in Muslim societies. Were they perfect? No, but they were much better and more civilized than European Christian societies back then, right? If you really want to form your Zionist ethno-state, right? You feel that there's a blood debt that needs to be paid, go and do it in Germany, right? Go and do it in England. But don't do it to innocent Palestinian farmers who have nothing to do with the Holocaust and who have nothing to do with your ancestors' historical persecution, right? Because that way you're simply punching down and you're basically continuing the cycle of oppression, right? At some point the vicious cycle of violence has to end, right? And you don't want to become just like the African American slaves who ended up oppressing local Africans in present day Liberia, right? So I just want to end this video by saying, you know, what is my proposal then? In a nutshell, what do I propose besides decolonization? I'm not proposing, you know, a repeat of the Nakba, right? In which the people of Israel then end up becoming stateless in the end, right? No, you see, I don't believe in cycles, in perpetuating cycles of violence. So no, I'm not advocating for the Nakba to be visited on the people of Israel. And I'm certainly not advocating for the people of Palestine to get up in arms and slaughter the people of Israel. And in fact, but when you say things like, oh, the people, if the state of Israel collapses and there's no Zionism, well, the Palestinians will slaughter every Jew in the land. That is your colonizer mind talking, right? That is not how people in the global south think. But I do think that if you want to live harmoniously and coexist peacefully with your neighbors, first you have to dismantle the artificial Zionist creation that is actually making Jewish people around the world less safe, right, than it is making them more safe, right? You know, as I've said, anti-Semitism is kept on life support by Zionism, right? And the fact of the matter is that in the future generations will not remember Israel as being the answer to the Holocaust or the answer to anti-Semitism. Do you know how future generations will remember the apartheid occupying nation of Israel? Well, they'll remember it in the same way they remember the southern slave masters. We don't remember the southern slave masters as oppressed, right? Even though their ancestors might have been oppressed serfs, or their ancestors might have been oppressed Irish or Scottish indentured laborers. That's not how we remember the southern slave masters. So just like the southern slave masters, you guys are also going to go down in history in the same way, right? Unless, of course, you take the correct path and you decolonize, respect the land, respect the people, respect the sanctity of every single inch of Palestine, whether that be the olive trees, the buildings that were built by the Palestinians, the houses that were built by them, or the people themselves. Show respect to the land. It is the only way that you can coexist peacefully, and the only thing that will stop the spread of anti-Semitism. Thank you.